So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. This, again, is the Safe House Project webinar series. It's really been my honor to host this for the last year and a half and get to talk about just things that affect us as the anti-trafficking industry in different ways that we can serve survivors and people who've experienced trafficking and exploitation. It seems that we never run out of topics, and that is really exciting. And so this is one that I admittedly don't know very much about, and so very excited to hear from our panelists. So we're really discussing what trafficking looks like in the US domestic legal sex trade. Specifically, we did porn last year. This year, talking about that within the legalized prostitution, the brothels that happen in Nevada, in certain counties in Nevada. And so we have some experts here, people that live and work in Nevada and have regular contact with the usually women that are in these brothels and have been working with them for quite some time to get to really share what that looks like and how that's been affecting not only the women, but the communities as well. So we can understand a little bit more about how that might relate to us as the anti-trafficking industry outside of Nevada. I know for me, this is something that's been fairly new to learn about, something that I've been really learning about through survivors that I've been working with through placement. And so something that I really wasn't too familiar with before learning about their experiences, and have just learned so much, not only from those survivors, but even from our quick pre-calls that I've had with each of these panelists. So really excited for all of us to get to understand more, so that in turn, we can turn around and do our jobs better and hopefully open that aperture of who we're able to serve and serve more survivors and do it in a better way. And so with that, it's going to be just truly my honor to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Trione, operates the Pregnancy Help Center in Fernley and has done quite a bit of outreach and socializing and serving of the women that are in the brothels in that area. It was really exciting for us when we did a presentation about a year ago for pregnancy centers, and for the most part, we were discussing how to identify and serve trafficking survivors in pregnancy centers. Brittany and I were, and for the most part, people weren't too aware. And then there was Joan, who was very clearly aware of the women that she was serving, and was really exciting to get to meet her in that capacity and know that she was well equipped to be serving the survivors that were coming into her center. So we'll get to hear a little bit from her in a moment. We also have Melissa Holland. Melissa is the co-founder and CEO of Awaken. They're a nonprofit offering direct services to women and children affected by commercial sex trade. She has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and she offered pro bono therapy to women affected by prostitution. And in 2011, she and Jen Robinson co-founded Awaken. They've offered trainings around the US, participated in an international research team, interviewing sex buyers. That's some research I'd really like to get my hands on, Melissa. And she serves on the steering committee for the Nevada Policy Council on Human Trafficking, is a member of the Northern Nevada Task Force, and is an appointed voting member on 2 statewide trafficking coalitions. So she's worked with hundreds of women and children affected by commercial sex trade, and she's really passionate about uniting communities in the fight to end sexual exploitation. So thank you, Melissa, for being willing to give us an hour of your time. And then we also have Brenda Sandquist. She's the founder and executive director for Exquisite, which is a nonprofit established in 2012, specifically designed to walk alongside victims of human trafficking, sexual assault, intimate terrorism, and bring them from a place of exploitation, not only surviving, but thriving in the next steps for a life free of what has been holding them captive. And she's passionate about leading a movement of strong women. We love strong women. Got plenty of them here today, and who have become empowered to have their voices heard and to shatter secrets they had to live under. And she's worked to empower women for over 30 years. She does quite a bit of brothel outreach. She operates the Diamond Strong Freedom Center and its drop-in center, and is ready to serve with a variety of services that are free, confidential, non-judgmental, and with no strings attached, to bring hope, courage, and a voice for survivors. So we appreciate, again, just all of the expertise that the three of you bring, and are willing to share it with us. So first off, I think there's a lot of just misunderstandings of what the brothels really are and what they look like. And so could someone start by just baselining us? I know for me, my only understanding was like what I had seen on TVs, and it's usually like a depiction of the bunny ranch seems to be the one that always gets attention in me. Would you mind starting off and explaining what a brothel is in Nevada? Whoever wants to start with that is fine.
I can start. So we have local brothels pretty close to us, and it's just a place where women are lured into thinking that they have a safe place to do work and that they'll make a lot of money, when in fact that is not true. I really feel like you could define it as it's a place that you can purchase violence and get away with it because it's legal. And so it's the facade that it's all glamorous and glorious and everyone's happy and they're safe and free from harm is not true. And I know that I've seen violence there and the after effects of what that does. So it is not what on TV, and it's not glamorous at all. It's actually a place where slaves have to work for a pimp.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to touch on what the brothels are, or maybe on what exactly, maybe Melissa, can you explain what the legality around the brothels is?
Like how they're allowed to be in a legal way. So this is over 50 years ago, a little bit of the history, actually, they first started because people came here, men left their families to come here to mine for gold and to mine. And so when it was a male dominated culture, sort of civilization, I'll use that loosely because there's nothing civil about this, but they basically said, and pimps would bring women, they would run brothels, Wild West, right? And eventually one person was running a brothel, and they would be mobile brothels going from town to cater the men's desires who were there in male run communities. And so that's how it came into the culture of Nevada historically. And then somebody basically said, hey, let's legalize this thing. And the first one was the Mustang Ranch. And that was the sort of the legal premise of how it came in. It was over 50 years ago now when it became legal, and the beginning of brothels. And at the time, what the state has done is they basically said, look, as a state, they consider themselves agnostic towards the issue. And they just allow the counties under a certain population. Currently, I believe that population is 700,000. That number's changed over the years, is allowed to determine whether or not that particular county wants to legalize brothels or prostitution in its area. And so there's certain counties that have done so. And so that's the legal positioning about it in Nevada.
Thank you. And could anyone, and I don't know if this is even accurate, but are there like regulations? Do you have to get a license to work in the brothel? What does that look like?
Yeah, they have to have a sheriff's card that they have to I think it's renewed every once a month for sure, but I know for a while it was every couple of weeks. They also have to have medical testing so that they're free from any STDs, which is a joke. But yeah, mostly they have to do a sheriff's card and register with the sheriff on a regular basis.
And of course, the girls have to get medical testing, but the buyers do not.
No.
Yeah. I think we can all know where my head went with that. I don't have to say that.
Lots to be inferred there. Yes.
Yeah, a lot to be inferred. And I know that Trione, you see this quite a bit running running a community service. And Melissa, you and I discussed this on the pre-call, but could one of you discuss, or both of you at some point discuss, what has been the effect of brothels having a legal sex trade on the community?
From what I've seen, it's so socially accepted. Our county a few years ago even had the opportunity to legalize prostitution and outlaw the brothels. And as a county, we voted to keep it. We voted that slavery in this type of situation was socially acceptable. In our county, people just very much think, what a great thing it is. At least they're safe. At least it's legal. It's being taxed. It's totally acceptable, but yet they don't think about what is this honestly, what is this really, and what is this really doing to the ladies and to our culture. I remember going past the freeway to go to my home, since I live in Fernley, and going from Reno, and you have to pass one of the brothels. And as having little children in the car, and them looking out and saying, Mommy, why do they have the Christmas lights on all the time? Because the red lights that were on. And saying, no, honey, that's not Christmas lights. That means something else. And having conversations like that with little tiny children and having to explain that this is something that we accept as a state and as a culture in our state. And the women are just so beaten down. I do abortion recovery primarily and offer abortion recovery free of charge to the ladies. That's how I got started in brothel work about 10 years ago, was offering that abortion recovery. I'm not going to say every woman in a brothel has had an abortion. That's not true. Although I've yet to meet someone who hasn't. And so all of these things, since that's part of your work, since that's part of your job, since that's part of the expectation, what a lot of pressure. It is ridiculous. And just how it's just so exciting. You showed me a little girl who said, I want to grow up and be a prostitute.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Melissa, do you want to touch on?
Oh, so much. Yep. This is something that I've honestly I don't think people understand the devastating effects and consequences of legalization. And so when I hear there's such a movement across not even just our country, but are in the world right now to push for full decriminalization of the sex trade. And rarely do we really address what that means and unpack it in the conversation from what I hear. And so it's so important to me that this gets out, that people understand the implication on culture and community. So we're 50 years into this, which means we've got generations born and raised in a state that has legalized this. And so we get to really look at the impact and see the evidence. And so this is not the scary, slippery slope that you tell people. This is the truth of what it's done to our community. And so the premise, first off, I'll say the London School of Economics, they even did a study on countries where it's been legal and the impacts. And it shows you basically roll out the red carpet for buyers to come to your area to purchase sex. And so when you do that, traffickers get wind of it. And so this is nuanced into it. It's not all what's in the report, but where the report finishes in concluding is you increase rates of trafficking when you legalize it. So to unpack that piece, the reason that happens is because you've basically said, hey, come here for sex, partake in whatever fantasy you have, you can purchase that fantasy for women here. There's so many things that happens with repeat buyers. And so most buyers, they're also addicted to pornography or repetitively watching it. When you engage in that, you go down sexual deviancy because physiologically, you have to start to watch harder porn or younger girls to get off. The novelty effect is there and you have to continue seeking to increase that. And so you then just the brain itself, you then want to reenact and the person you're reenacting it on is the person you're purchasing sex from in person. So men know they can come to Nevada to do that without consequence, low risk, high reward. We've rolled out the red carpet. So we asked Creighton University a while ago to do a study on prevalence to say, hey, this report said you're going to increase rates of trafficking when you legalize it. They studied it in countries. Let's see if that's true for a state. So they did a prevalence study. They looked at all the online ads and they deciphered, are these unique ads or are they repetitive ads? And they've got the unique ads, meaning one individual per ad, or multiple ads by one individual is counted as one. We're conservative here. We are the highest ranking state in the nation for the rates of the sex trade, not including brothels. We were 63% higher than the next highest state. We have rolled out the red carpet. As a result, you're also bringing repetitive buyers who now are conditioned to be more violent. So you look at all the other consequences of, okay, let's look at the data of how women are treated in our state. We have some of the worst rates when it comes to women being murdered by men, violence against women, rates of sexual abuse, sexual assault. We're like top 3 on all of the worst things you want to be in violence against women in our state. That is not coincidental. This is what we attract when we allow repetitive sex purchasing, because what you're doing, this is part of what I learned in Germany, interviewing the men. You're going to have to stop me at some point. But
this is so far going. Yes.
The buyers that we talk to, They genuinely attributed the law about it being legalized to purely look at this transactional and dehumanizing. And they're endorsed because it's legal. So they feel permitted to do so when they're purchasing sex. And by the time I left, I think we'd interviewed about 75 buyers. And these are like 3-hour interviews at length. And so these guys, we're getting a ton of information and they're talking about their experiences of buying sex. And they're talking about some of their worst experiences. And you would think it's because they have some kind of compassion for the person on the other end of the scenario they're talking about. And so when asked, do you believe the women are trafficked? Do you think they want to be there? Do you think they enjoy it? They're like, no, they're trafficked. They don't want to be there. They don't enjoy it. They're there for my satisfaction and that's it. Then they say, does that bother you? No, it's legal. If you go into, so that language is a job like any other. This is what we need to mean when we say that, because that's the sort of the tagline to legalize or fully decriminalize the sex trade in other states. So look at what that actually means. Unpack when it's a job like any other. When you go and you get your tires changed, do you care if the guy likes his job? Do you care if your waitress likes her job? Do you care in these transactional situations if the person on the other end of the transaction is there willingly, or like, we don't think about it in a transactional place. We should think about it in these situations, but when it's legalized, you're given extra permission not to, because you're just there to purchase what you are there for. And you're not at all concerned about the person on the other end of that transaction, even if you think she's been trafficked to be there.
Yeah, that's so good. When I go through the drive-through, when I have the maintenance guy come to my house, I'm not thinking about, is this what he wanted to do with his life? And is he enjoying his time here? That's not at all what I'm thinking. So thank you for that. And what I'm hearing from all of that is that by legalization in this context and in any context that has been studied, increases that power differential between men and women, even outside of the sex trade. And so increases that violence. And yeah, wow, thank you. Brenda, as somebody who has gone into the brothels for so many years and met with the women, and Treon, feel free to jump into this as well. Where are these women usually from? Who are these girls that are in these brothels?
It used to be that most of them were from out of state. They would come in and work for 2 weeks is what it was supposed to do, but it never was regulated that much, 2 weeks a month. And then they'd go back home. And the women that I've worked with, they didn't know, their families didn't know what they did. Their community didn't know what they did. And so that was just their way of coming in, making some money, and then going back and trying to live a normal, quote unquote, life. And so but I feel like there's more local women now participating. So they don't really ever get away from it. They drive by, they might drive to work there, but they're in your community and they truly don't want to be known as a prostituted person. So they're going to try to live a life that's different when they're not in the brothel. That's been a challenge, I think, for some of them that are more local. The ones that can come and go, they can go back and try to pretend that they have a life, but it's hard. It's a harsh life, and it does take a toll. And I think it's both, but I feel like lately there's more local girls that are here working than out of state.
I would say the person who's in the brothel is the person you least expected. It's probably someone you know. It's your neighbor. It's the lady down the street. It's the lady who's working PTA. And that's what Brenda said is exactly right. Like, you go to work and you work for a couple of weeks. And often the story is, oh, mom's a salesman or mom works out of town. And she's the mom. She is your neighbor. She is every person. It's so interesting because we have a volunteer at our office who used to work in one of the brothels, and I won't name it. And she was the cook. And she had no problem being the cook, and her children were raised up knowing that she worked there, and it was all perfectly acceptable. And that's part of Nevada life, is that you go to work, no matter, even if, because remember, somebody's cooking, somebody's cleaning, somebody's taking care of the grounds. This is all a thing. In Nevada, if you're doing rideshare, you're required to stay on the property after you drop, as a rideshare person, after you drop somebody off. And so and you have to stay there the whole time. And the rideshare people actually get a cut of whatever process, whatever happened, however much money was made inside of services offered, the rideshare person gets a profit of that. So our state has brought even the rideshare people into being a trafficker. This is much bigger than just even what anybody thinks about, because there's so many ways Nevada has brought other people into being traffickers, and the women are being trafficked. And often people say it's only those types of women. As a survivor, I wasn't one of those types of women, but let me tell you, it is awful easy to get trapped into that world where you're just simply going, I need some money to survive. I've got bills to pay. What do? I don't have any skills. I have this skill. I can do this. And they are just so demeaning. When I've been inside there and you're waiting in the bar to talk to ladies, and the men even in the bar, before they even go back and decide what services and decide on a price. And can you even imagine? We don't get to walk into Target and decide on a price of what we're going to pay for our new TV. We don't get to negotiate a price of how much it's worth. Imagine being the woman who's standing there, and this man that you are talking to you're negotiating how much your value is and your worth is to him, so that he can treat you poorly. This is every woman. And so if we think that it's only a certain type of person, that's not true. It could be your daughter. It could be your daughter trying to make money to go to college, and it gets easily trapped into this lie.
How often are the women that are in the brothels, from all of the women that you have worked with, the three of you, whether while they're in the brothel or after they've left, how often are they like truly trafficked, and they're out of force, fraud, or coercion?
I think every woman is trafficked who's there, even if it's through herself, even if she feels that she has no other options, even if she feels if she's married and her husband knows what her job is. And that happens more often than you might think.
So to me, the money is the coercive piece. And so the women I used to hear Rachel Moran often talk about, if you guys don't know her, please look her up. Her book Paid For is phenomenal. She's a survivor, and she would often reference this as paid rape. And I didn't quite know how to unpack that. And again, doing that trip to Germany and listening to buyers, it made perfect sense to me. You basically have a buyer that's using money to extract sex from somebody who does not want to have sex with him. She's not there because she wants the sex. She's there because she needs the money. And so when you have someone having sex with someone who doesn't want to have sex with them, that's called rape. The money confuses everybody. We know what it means. The money confuses everybody. If somebody has sex with you and you don't want to have sex with them, it's point blank. Nobody's confused about that. When they leave money on the table, everybody gets confused. And suddenly the whole situation gets rebranded, and we call it choice and consent. And then we say things like, and she likes it, and it's empowering. The money actually doesn't change the experience for her. The law, though, co-signs the fantasy of the buyer, not the reality of the survivor. So you've got this toxic combination between the money, the fantasy, and the law that rebrand the whole situation. And what should be called rape is called consent.
Yeah.
So to me, the money is the coercive piece that should be putting this thing down and make it understood. And then to legalize it just means, oh, you can traffic and be covered and protected by the law.
Right.
Because they all have a brothel owner. There's a trafficker there.
Brenda, do you want to add to that?
Yes, and just, what Melissa said, that there are traffickers that will have their women go through the brothel to hide them out because it's legal. Some traffickers have sent women there to punish them because they're not making enough on the street. I might just share this one story that could hopefully make it a little clearer. A woman was purchased. First of all, like Treon, what you're saying is like seeing a lineup and watching men look them up one side and down the other is so demeaning. And then You can see in their eyes, pick me, I need money. And then deep down, please don't pick me. So this one friend of mine that was a very tiny little one was in a situation where the man continued to go beyond what he purchased. And so it was not a good situation. And so he kept pulling her away from the panic button. And I always like to say, why was there a panic button in there if everything's consensual and a good time? And so he kept pulling her away from that. She was down at the end of the house. It took a while for someone to hear her cries for help. And when they did come in, she was laying there bleeding, and it was not a good scene. The madam came in and she turned and she looked at the man and said, "I'm really sorry this happened to you." Not the woman laying on the bed bleeding. And so she turned to the man then and said, "I'm sorry this happened to you. We're going to give you another experience for free." And the man looked at the girl on the bed and laughed at her as he walked out. So I might point out that they're actually giving away a vagina for free because the man didn't get what he wanted out of his violence. So they gave him another chance for free. And that's just, I don't think that's an isolated type story. I think it happens a lot. And women don't have a choice. I think every woman, I agree, every woman's trafficked there. And if you knew how to break down what they do bring in for the brothel, they don't get even a half of what they earn. It is, I would say it's always violent rape every time someone comes in. And Melissa said watching porn and wanting to recreate that just has fueled things so much more. So they're not safe. There's one quote that I've never forgotten too, that the former trafficker pimp the one down by me said, "These women are not worth anything. If they don't work in the brothel, the only use they will have is to be along the side of the road with a needle hanging out of their arm." So there's no value in the person.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, so what really prompted me to want to do this webinar is a specific survivor that I was working with who had very clearly been trafficked as a minor, and that experience led her to the brothel, sounding like a really safe place. And she was recruited into the brothel, or by the woman who ran the brothel. And essentially what stood out to me the most was what the woman who ran the brothel told her to make the brothel sound attractive was what we tell survivors who are looking to go into safe homes and programs. She told her that she would help her get her GED, that she'd have the opportunity to go to college, that they had a therapist. She told her that they had a therapist that she could go to. Like, they told her that she wouldn't have to pay for her food. They told her all of these things that are quote for quote what I tell women to, and men and other people to help them know that like where they're going in a safe home is going to be safe. And so that was really how she had sold the brothel. And of course, when this survivor got there, that was not what happened. None of those things were available to her. So right off the bat, I saw fraud, right? We saw fraud. And then the survivor was raped while she was in the brothel, very clearly, like a rape that would have been very difficult for anyone else to describe as anything other than that. And that was discounted by the woman who ran the brothel. And at which point the survivor wanted to leave. And the woman who ran the brothel told her really clearly, "You owe us money. If you leave, we will take legal action against you." And so this survivor called a friend who actually she'd known from years before, who she had not talked to for many years, who lived in the area, who came in the dead of night and helped her get out of there. Like she snuck out of the house. So being able to leave freely was not really something that was available to her. And this was someone who didn't have an active trafficker outside of this, who had walked in of her own accord. And that's what made me really want to do this. Would you all say that her experience was something that is really isolated, or would you say that matches up with other women that you've worked with or talked to?
I would say that completely matches up with the norm. Unfortunately, I had an experience not too long ago with one of the madams, and she was extremely unpleasant on this particular night. And I jokingly refer to it as intense fellowship time. So, because it was pretty intense. And one of the things that she did was she came right up and stuck her finger in our face and said, these women are not trafficked. These women want to be here. They love this job. They absolutely adore this. You can't do anything that helps them. And they are beyond help. They are beyond anything you can offer. And they don't even deserve it. And she went on in front of everyone in the bar, in front of all the ladies who were there. And there's this one sweet little thing who had just started that night, who was sitting over in the corner just crying, because this madam was very clearly, very loudly saying how these women are worth nothing and they cannot be saved and do not deserve it, and that they want to be there. That poor little one didn't want to be there. She's over there crying. I think that's very normal what you dealt with.
Yeah, and thank you. And we don't usually on the webinars, we don't usually talk about as much behind closed door things as we're talking about today. But I feel like this is so important because, like Triona and like Brenda, like you both said, so many of these girls are not from Nevada. They're from, and even if they were, like, they're from all over. So they are the women that we're serving oftentimes. And we understand a lot about what happens on the track. We understand a lot about what's happening in the home. We understand a lot about what's happening in the strip club or in the hotel. And this is one aspect that we don't understand about what the experience of the women who are working in the brothels are. And so when they come to us, when we don't understand it, we're not able to treat them as holistically, if we don't understand really how this is different in so many ways. And so I thank you for being willing to share some of that stuff that, it really is horrific and things that we hate having to know that people walk through. But I think it's important to understand the way that trafficking can look different in this context than it can in other forms of trafficking. And for instance, with this woman that I was working with, that you all have said now that her experience is kind of par for the course, it was really difficult to get her services because she was so fresh in her healing that she didn't understand her experience as trafficking, which I think I'm a survivor. Those of us who are survivors all were in that place at one point when we early exited. We didn't usually exit because we knew we were being trafficked. That came along after. And so she was in that place. And because her experience of being trafficked looked very different than what we're familiar with as the national or anti-trafficking industry, it was very difficult to get someone to serve her as a trafficking survivor because they didn't understand that force, that fraud, and that coercion and that debt bondage really that she had experienced while she was there. Thank you.
I was in a group setting with, I'll just say, more mature women not too long ago. And I think that's the mentality of, especially Nevadans, they're out there by choice and they're making a lot of money. And I was trying to explain, no, there's some things that happen. And she goes, I disagree. They're getting paid, so they don't deserve to have services. And so I think that is a pretty widespread, large picture of community. And to me, some of the women that we've been able to serve are some of the most beautiful, kind, caring women I've ever met. They're strong. They always are considerate and caring for others, not themselves. And so they are not seen the way they should be seen. And to me, that's a beautiful thing that I love to serve, because they don't deserve the mentality of Nevada. Really, it is Melissa talked earlier, it's a mentality that we need to break down for sure.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And I'm going to ask the next question, but I want to point out that what you just said, I think so much of the argument for legalization is that it will reduce the stigma that causes harm to people. And what you just said is very clearly that it has done the opposite in a place in our country where it has been legalized for over 50 years. So thank you for bringing that up and making that point without even intending to make that point. That was perfect. But I wanted to ask, and Melissa, maybe you can touch on more. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it may lead to where you're going. I'm not sure, but there's a conversation I was in recently where I also saw the harm. So one of the things the law is doing is saying what's happening to you is okay. It's, for example, when the little girl goes to the mom and says, Mom, your boyfriend is hurting me. And the mom says, you must be confused. No, he wouldn't do that to you. That's what the law is essentially saying to women that are being harmed in the legal sex trade. We're saying you must be confused, because why would we legalize something that causes harm to you? And so the whole community then gets groomed into believing this. And so that's the mainstream idea, is why would we legalize something that causes harm? So we internalize that belief system. And so that's when you get comments like Brenda has recently, and the beliefs. It's very common for us when we do conversations in group education and awareness that they think all of those things. And it's just this unconscious bias of the law is here to protect us. And there was a meeting I was in recently that I will try to be vague on, because it's not, I was in the meeting, but it's not my story, but it was something I witnessed that really alarmed me. And so there's a group that celebrates sex workers' rights and fights for their rights. And there's a group that is concerned about the harm that comes from this. And so I'm in this meeting, and there's an individual who starts to share with a shaky voice that she's wished she could just be, she feels misunderstood and sex work is great. And the way she shares, you can hear the trauma that she's actually going through. And yet you just want to sit there. And because she's in with the group that celebrates sex workers' rights, they're essentially saying, we celebrate your violence. We celebrate what's happening to you. And they help her, they enable her to believe this is appropriate to have done to her. And it's incredibly harmful to believe this and to create laws around this and to have groups formed around the rights to do this. This is an act where there is an individual with more power, more privilege, and more resources using that privilege to get his sexual fantasy from you again and again. And that's day one. And then day two, again and again, and a different fantasy and a different guy and a different thing. Every single time, using his money to get something from you that you don't want to give him. You just want his money. And then you have a group of women celebrating this.
Right.
And fighting for the rights of his choice on your body. And it's so harmful, because you hear the shaky voice of the individual feeling misunderstood, and she is, but she doesn't understand exactly why.
Yeah. Thank you. And I couldn't agree more. I've been in that position in those meetings, saying those things prior to accident. So I understand.
When you have a participant in a group that doesn't think they should have services because they bought into the lie.
Right.
It's legal. Of course, there's no harm. Couldn't be further from the truth.
What's been the response from law enforcement? How does this affect law enforcement in your communities? Treon, you look like you have something you want to say. Treon, excuse me.
Their hands are really tied. Not to speak negatively about our law enforcement. We have some great officers in our county, but their hands really are tied. They have to follow the law. Every room inside the brothel is a private docile. So even when something's going terribly wrong or something completely illegal is happening, in addition to the violence of the legal part, something illegal is happening. By the time that they can even legally respond, it's done and over. There isn't any. Their hands are tied. Yeah.
I can tell you an experience I had with a local sheriff who's not in the county, because here in our county, and I went to him and said, you know, why is this pimp not in jail because he violently raped someone so badly? And anyway, it's a long story, but anyway, he basically threw up his hands and goes, not my problem, it's not my county, they're not here, it's legal there. I think we do have some really good law enforcement people trying to do really good work. I think my bigger issue is our judicial system, because the law enforcement can get you to a place of possible arrest. And then there's all those things that the follow through there. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I agree, Treon. I don't want to speak ill of our law enforcement, but there's some amazing ones, and there's some more that some might even be participatory.
Sure.
The Reno, they started a human exploitation and trafficking unit, the HEAT team. And in 2021, they have committed and followed through with not arresting women who are picked up for solicitation. So they don't arrest the women. They have targeted buyers and traffickers. as a result, what we're finding is women don't see law enforcement as the enemy anymore. And there's now getting more successful prosecutions to the traffickers. And they're arresting far more buyers than ever before because their operations are solely focused now on the buyers and traffickers. And which is a great segue on what does work in the in the sex trade, right? And so what we have found, what is effective is you do not criminalize the person being purchased. You offer services and partnerships with nonprofits, and you teach your community, you change culture around this issue, and you focus on deterring the demand, which means arresting the buyers and significantly penalizing them and the traffickers as well. And then you start to see a cultural shift around it. And we saw our local law enforcement make that shift, and it is being successful.
And would you say that because you're in a county, in Reno being a county where the buying is illegal, as opposed to say a county where, like where Treon lives, where the buying has been made legal in so many contexts, that really changes that you're able to do something in that county that they're not going to be able to do until that law changes? Would you say that?
Correct. They couldn't run a buyer operation in a brothel
Yeah,
because they're not committing a crime.
right. How, and I know this isn't a question that I had on here, so I apologize for bringing it out of left field, but how would you guys say that the brothels have affected the sex work and the buying that is happening outside of the brothels?
I personally, I don't think it's affected it. I don't think it's went down. I don't think there's less outside because of the brothels. No way. The brothels are far more expensive than what sex on the street is. And so, you can go into any casino and see women prostitute themselves for far less, just trying to make a dollar, just trying to survive. And I don't have any stats on that or anything. Melissa probably does. I don't have anything like that. I just know from like boots on the ground work. No, it hasn't reduced anything.
And Melissa, I know you did talk about that statistic about how Nevada actually has the most amount of
Illegal sex trade.
Sex trade. Thank you. Outside of the brothels. And I know Brenda, you had discussed about how that had affected like youth specifically when we had talked. Do you want to touch on that?
I think it's important to note, and I'm sure Melissa can affirm these numbers, but most of the women that I've interviewed, their sexual exploitation started very young. It's so weird. An average age was 3. I know that's just an appalling thought that they began to be exploited at 3. So when you begin your life that way, it continues throughout your life as far as exploitation, being vulnerable, and as far as the youth. So those could be some youth that have parents that have had that all throughout their life. And yeah, we are seeing in Carson a lot of youth, and some of they're being referred by the juvenile probation officers, and a lot of them are just in that environment of family that's been tough, and so they're vulnerable to exploitation. We're trying to remove that piece, so hopefully they can see that that is not a path they have to take, or even a path that their parents had. We had one mom come in, she goes, "She's just like me," like flippantly, and we're like, that's not really a great statement. Man, if we could change the legacies and turn the tide for our youth, I think we would see definitely a shift for sure. Because I think it is normalized a lot, but it's normalized because maybe you've been exploited since very young age.
Yeah. And I want to wrap up a little bit, but I know there's so much more that we could discuss on this, but knowing that, like with what Treon had said, that communities are still choosing and actively voting to keep legalized prostitution in their communities. So knowing that because of that, you all are really fighting an uphill battle in many ways in serving these women. What can we do as the anti-trafficking industry outside of Nevada? Because most people on this call, I'm going to say 99% of the people that I saw in the chat are actively working in anti-trafficking. What can we do outside of Nevada to be supporting you and maybe helping that uphill battle seem a little less uphill?
Right now, we've got a petition written by a survivor. It's really a letter. It's not even a petition. There's a current legislation push to increase penalties for buyers. that shifts the cultural, the low risk, high reward of our state. Because as it has been said, we've rolled out the red carpet for sex buyers to come to Nevada. We're a sex tourism state, and we've got to shift that narrative. And you do the research, even by interviewing buyers, says a deterrent for me is the risk of getting caught. If there's low risk, that's not a deterrent. So we have to increase that. And we do have a legislative effort. It's already gone through it's gone through the assembly. It's now about to be heard on the Senate side. And so a survivor wrote a letter asking other survivors to please sign on to submit this letter showing them we do support this law. Because what we're finding is lawmakers are starting to want to listen to sex workers' rights groups rather than victims of trafficking. And they're wanting to, honestly, if you're a sex workers' rights group, then let victims speak up on what would protect them, because that's what they're actually saying would help us and we're supporting. And so if you're there to actually create laws to protect the vulnerable, that's who you're going to listen to. And so we want to be able to provide that letter signed by as many survivors as possible. And so we'd love to get you guys to circulate that. And if you have survivors that you work with, if you are a survivor, to please ask people to sign it if they're legislatively minded or active in policy. Make sure you know it is for public record. It's written on there. You have to read and note that this is for public record, but you can sign Jane Doe if you still want your voice to be heard, but not your name to be recognized.
Yeah, and you sent me that email and I've signed that email. So I have the link and I can include that when I send out this recording for survivors that are on here, or for those of you that have survivors.
Yeah, I can try to pull it up and put it in the chat real quick too, if I can find it.
That will be great.
I think that, like what Melissa said too, is that the deterring the buyer, but I also might mention that the HEAT team has also, when they do their stings, they put their picture on the news, so that shame hopefully will be a deterrent as well. But it's appalling how many people they have been able to arrest in stings, and yeah, it's just still a huge battle. And why my beginning of the year, I just wanted to have a focus, and it's like, why can't Nevada be known for something different? We don't have to be known for sex brothels and legal prostitution. So I just think we should just all continue to make people aware. I think that women, like that woman in this one thing, they get paid for it. Isn't that okay? No, it's not okay. I think we need to really make our communities aware. We need to make our medical teams aware. They see it all the time. We need our law enforcement to be aware. And then if you just see something that's off, I think you should call Melissa, me, Trian, call us, and we'll try to help figure out how we can help people. I always can look at someone in the eye and you can just see. If you look deep enough in their eye, you can see where they're at. And so if you see something that's off, man, say something. Don't go up to a trafficker. That's not a good idea. But let's just help bring awareness for sure and support the women that are doing such good work. And that's my passion.
Thank you.
As far as girls and women who like boots on the ground stuff, absolutely. We do need to sign the petitions. We do need to stand up. We do need to have the laws changed, or we're not going to get anywhere without those laws changed. As far as like servicing right inside, loving on those women, telling them you are not what your job is, offering service to them, offering services like what Safe House does, and offering to get them out, standing next to them, being the person willing to show up in the middle of the night and pick them up and sneak them out, being the person who brings in a snack for them, being the person who offers services for free, like we do for abortion recovery services, and walking through those hard things with them, because so few people want nothing from them. Everybody wants something from them. They feel as a survivor, it's like everybody wants something from you. Nobody just wants to love on you because of who you are, not what you do, not because what you can offer them, but just because you exist, and you are important and you are precious because you exist. And so that boots on the ground thing is just loving that woman and not judging her because of her job. She is not what her job is.
Yeah. Thank you, Trion. And I'm grateful that the survivors that are there and the people that are still being victimized have each of you and so many others that are your partners and allies in Nevada. And we have a few questions, but I'm going to collect them because they're more unique questions and send them out to you so we can get some answers to include in the after email. But I just really appreciate you all being willing to share with us and help us understand something that like even we in the industry misunderstand and don't have information around, so that we can serve people better, and hopefully we can partner with you in all of the things that you're doing. And I will send out that survivor sign-on letter that Melissa shared with me. And we hope that 50 years from now, things will look a lot different in Nevada than they do now. So thank you for the work that each of you are doing to make that a reality. And I'll let you enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You.